It's another beautiful Sunday afternoon. This is Robin Minds. Welcome. My name is Ebuka Obiuchendo. Thanks a lot for joining us. Yes, it's a great Sunday. For a lot of people, Super Eagles Sunday. Yes, the Super Eagles are back in action today. A lot of Nigerians are holding their breath. A lot more people seem very confident or overconfident. Hopefully it doesn't backfire. But yes, the Super Eagles have given us a lot of reasons to smile. 3 games in a row, 3 wins. We need just, I think, 3 or 4 more wins to get the trophy. But let's not think that far yet. 1 game at a time. We're playing Tunisia this evening, and we're sending all our best wishes to the coaching crew and the players. Hopefully they continue to be as superb as they've been, and we'll move on to the quarterfinals after today. But we're going to be talking a lot more about the Super Eagles later on in the show today. But we're going to be starting off now with education. International Day of Education is what we're celebrating on the show today. It's a topic or a conversation that I like to get into a lot on this show. Everybody who knows how government works or how countries work would always tell you that education is probably the bedrock of any successful nation. And a lot of us are not very excited at the way we are handling things here, and we can only continue to hopefully push the narrative that things should change, and maybe one day government will do their part. I'm here with Okeyinfu Ajayi, who's an education strategist. Thanks for being back here today.
Thank you.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Good to see you again. I want to start it straight off with the budget. You know, the education budget, with the 2022 appropriation bill was passed on the last day of 2021. You know, UNESCO has always said that any country, or all countries, should allocate at least 15 to 20% of their national budgets to education. Nigeria has always hovered around the 4 to 5% sort of figure.
5.6,
yeah, but we've had a bit of an increase this year to 7.2%.
Yeah.
That's 1.18 trillion naira, which is some progress. But obviously not anywhere near the 15 to 20% we're seeing. But what do you think about that?
I'm happy.
Yes.
I mean, it does say something that they did increase the budget this year. So, well, yeah, for this year. And so that's good.
Yeah.
I'm happier still about Lagos State's budget, which was even much better. But it's a good thing. Now let's look at implementation. Let's look at execution of that budget. But we seem to be on a good roll.
Yeah, and I know you've been here before. We talked a lot about, you know, the different levels of education and what should probably be most important. And everybody talks about the foundation. Universal basic education has been something that has been a part of our narrative in Nigeria for so long, but we're still not sure if we've gotten it right and how it should actually work. Still talking about the budget, I think 44.6 billion naira was allocated to the Ministry of Education alone, and 31.1 to UBA. Doesn't seem like a good figure.
To be honest, right, Ebuka, sometimes it's not so much the figure, but the planning around that figure. So it doesn't seem like a good figure, but my question typically is, what are they going to even do with it? What's the plan on ground for it?
Yeah. Is it just salaries? Is it building structures without actually...
I think what I would say is, what is the purpose of education, of universal basic education, of early childhood education? Once we get to that point where we can define what we hope to get from our early childhood education, from that basic level, it's easier to then allocate the funds to the right places. It's easier to even find the right people to be doing the right things. It's easier to check the system. So yeah, it doesn't seem like it's enough, but right now that's what we have. You know? So what are we going to do with it? That is, for me, the question that is on the table, and the question everybody should be looking at, to be honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, the last time we were here, we were talking about COVID and how all of this has affected education. You know, I think one of the saddest parts of COVID for a lot of parents, of course, people lost their lives, but for parents who had children who were going to school, was how the stark difference that appeared, with certain schools being able to afford computers and in-home schooling, and certain parents being able to afford internet for that. And some other schools, especially government schools, were completely shut down for that entire period, you know. Any lessons learned at all, you think?
There were lessons learned. I mean, if I look at Eco Excel and I look at EduBest, they have learned some lessons. And I mean, they immediately started some of these. I mean, education in the South and in the Southwest is so starkly different from what we have in the North, right? You know, it's so starkly different. So in terms of, directly to your question, lessons were learned. Because it put us in a place where we realized that the same way the future of work has changed, the future of education has changed. And that's the theme, right, for this year's International Day for Education. Stop the change, I think transform education, something like that, but it's talking about educational transformation. And so the lessons for me really is that the public sector, mostly the public sector, and low-cost private schools should be saying what is in our environment, right? It's honestly, to be honest, not about the computer. It is what would work for us. And that for me is the point of technology. What works for us? What do we do? Do we have community projects that we may be looking at and looking at how we can use this within our context in the villages, in the really underserved areas of community, and saying how do we get schooling in there, right? And then how do we transform this schooling to be what is relevant for them? A lot of times what they need is not even the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s. It's how do I survive in my environment where I'm currently residing?
Yeah.
And that's I think is where we miss it a lot when we look at education in its entirety and the lessons that we have learned from COVID.
So Governor El-Rufai and a couple of other governors do come into focus a lot, for their testing of teachers and how they constantly do that and, throw them out and all of that. But he keeps saying that this has produced results for him. He's seen, better quality teachers. And that brings, of course, to the conversation around teachers. Where are we at that? I know you talk about Lagos a lot and maybe a lot of your focus is here, but with Lagos State, for example, of course, we're not talking private schools. Now, even the private schools have their own issues. The conversation around teachers is still a very heavy one, isn't it?
It is. To be honest with you, we have beyond teacher quality, we have teacher shortage. There's severe teacher shortages. So when I see that teachers
quality and quantity are a problem.
Yes, exactly. So when I see teachers being kicked out of the profession, I'm like, don't do that. What we should be looking at is what is our skill-up process? What is our capacity development framework within the sector, within every single sector? And that's what we need to be thinking about, right? It's not so much that they don't know, because they're a product of the system, right? They also schooled here. And so they don't know because they were not taught in a way that would enable them to know, right? Also, the way they were taught, the way my teachers were taught, to be honest, and the way my teachers I beg your pardon, in my children's school are teaching are very different. So beyond just what a teacher should know, are we even looking at the developmental framework for what a teacher should know today? And so we do have those gaps, learning gaps, in terms of what they should know. But generally speaking, there has been a lot of teacher training initiatives that I'm beginning to see. Also head teacher initiatives. Is it as widespread as it should be? No. But it's something. It has started. And what we're trying to get into right now is say, let us take a look at the colleges of education, because that's that's the powerhouse for bringing out teachers into the environment. What is happening in the colleges of education? Where are they? How are they being run? What are the expectations for every single graduate out of the College of Education? We should be looking at that. Not that we have brought them out of the system and then we check them and we see that they're failing. That failure is not their failing. It's a failing of the system that has produced them. Yeah. So that for me is what we should be looking at.
So the issue of teachers, is it solvable without money? Is it something that only needs money?
That's a really, really good question. Really good question. Is it solvable without money? Parts of it are solvable without money. Parts of it need to be solved with money. And so let me go to the parts that need to be solved with money first. The parts that need to be solved with money are the parts of infrastructure. There is learning infrastructure, and then there is capacity infrastructure. Capacity infrastructure, some of it can be solved with money, some can't. You might have people who do pro bono, and they don't have a problem doing pro bono and come and teach and train teachers on a pro bono basis. But there are times where you need to get in professionals who would require money to come and train the head teachers, train the teachers across the schools that we have across Nigeria. And then we look at the infrastructure development. Again, parts of it you can get grants, you can get nations to donate to us. But at some point, you need to begin to think about sustainability, which is why we're looking at the budget and saying, what is this budget skewed towards? What is the point of this budget? What plans have been made for this budget, right? So, and when you look at money as well, right, how are teachers being paid? Sometimes I'm not learning something, not because I don't want to, but because I don't see the point. And when you sit down and have conversations with teachers, especially in public schools, it's like, what's the point? We keep hearing these promises, and there's nothing birthing from these promises. So what really is the point? So we do need the money in the sector. We do need the money. But again, the things, for example, thinking, right? People say common sense is not common. And the reality, why common sense is not common is because common sense is education, right? There's schooling, Ebuka, and then there's education. Schooling is what happens when you are in school. When you get out of school, what is happening? What are you taking from what you have learned in school and you're using today? And I asked that question last time I was here. I said, look, we've gone to school, but the reality is how much of what we learned in primary, even uni, are we using today? No, it's adapted learning. So that adaptation is what a lot of the teachers are missing. To say, oh, you know what? Let me look around my environment and say, oh, there's a tree here. And so if I'm teaching living things, for example, I don't necessarily have to take my children out, but I can point to it. I can help them understand that concept and bring it home, helping them know that every time they go out and they see a tree, they recognize it as a living thing. It leaves their notebooks and comes into life, you know, what everyday living. And so if they then see somebody hacking at a tree, they realize, oh, you know what, that shouldn't be happening. Because potentially carbon dioxide is not going to be extracted out of the environment because that's the purpose of the tree. You know, so parts of that, maybe you don't need money. But that initial basis.
Yeah. Still talking money now, and it's a very controversial conversation a lot of people either have or don't even want to have, you know, about, you know, universities and how government still subsidizes university education. Now, the one argument is that, you know, like we've talked about already, the foundation is most important. Take that money, channel it to free basic universal education. If you want to do tertiary, you know, education, it's now up to you to be able to afford that. Do you think that makes sense, where we have a solid UB or foundational system, and then tertiary education is completely up to the individual if they want it, which is what places like the United States have?
Yeah, so the point of that, right, again, is about structures. When you finish your GSS3 exam, actually, from when you go into primary 6 all the way up to GSS3, the way that system originally is structured is such that students leave that section and they're either going into academics, which is what takes them to the SS and then to university, or they go technical. And that's a system running beautifully in Germany. I think that's the only country I know particularly that I've spent some time studying that works, right? And we don't have that framework in Nigeria. So what is happening is that everybody is either going to uni, or they're being seen as people who have failed at education. And nobody wants to be seen as a failure at education, which is why the government will keep pumping money into universities. Why? Because that's the only system that they have running. What they should be looking at is to develop an alternate system. And not I know I'm digressing here, but just think about how people reason polytechnics. A lot of polytechnics keep saying, oh, I want to become a university. Oh, I want to upgrade. What do you mean upgrade? Don't you understand your purpose? Your purpose is a technical school, right? And if you meet somebody who has left a polytechnic and they're fixing a bulb for you, they're so good at it. Why? They drill down into that. A university education is a bit more concept-based, right? They're looking at several different things, and then the person decides to do a master's to specialize. But the government hasn't even given a pride of place to the alternatives. And so people would keep looking at only one section, which is the problem we're having with oil as well. All of these other things in the economy, I'm digressing again, that we may have been looking at, and that may be something that would have created sustainability for our economy away from oil. We're not looking at it. We're talking about it, but we're not doing anything about it. So till they do something about the alternative for children who wish not to go to university, they would have to keep funding those universities. So yes, do I want them to spend a lot more money in the basic education, the UBE sector? Yes, I would. But again, if you spend money there and you are killing the other aspects of it, I don't feel that we're doing any favors. So what we need to really look at is, you know what, put it out on the table and say, what do we really want to do? What is our purpose? Right now, education is just about the certificate. It's about checking a box, I've gone to school. Until we keep looking at it like that, I don't see how we're going to move forward.
What are countries in Europe, like Finland, you know, especially Scandinavian countries, doing differently, where education is pretty much free, up to tertiary level?
Yeah.
You know, you go through school, I know people who school in Finland in particular, who have degrees without paying a dime. You know, parts of France, the fees are ridiculously low, cheaper than secondary schools here, as long as you're a citizen of this country. What are they doing differently? Why is education so, like, I don't know how to phrase it, but what are they doing that we can't learn from?
You know, you said something when you started this segment. You said, without education, a nation is pretty much sitting in the mud. And they have recognized that. We haven't. till we recognize that we're sitting in the mud and we cannot get out of it, till we face and do something about the education sector, we're never going to get out of it. Finland has, let me tell you what, I had a conversation with people in Finland. They came to Nigeria to sell a solution to us. When they came and they were talking, I said, okay, so tell me what exactly happens. Why are you guys doing so well? Why is it so relevant? And they said, oh, the reason why it's relevant is that they have a 3-tier system of feeding education. Education in any nation that sees education as important, right, is a solution provider. If there's a problem in our nation, for example, the problem of corruption, for example, the problem of people not doing the work that they should be doing, what happens is that education, that feedback system goes into the schools, the colleges of education. That goes right there, right? So it's coming from the society. It goes into the colleges of education because there's that feedback mechanism. They then build the teachers, right? And those teachers are then what? Coming to feed the children in the education sector, of the parents, and then the government has the right policies. Why? Because they know that nothing happens. Ebuka, if you open a pure water shop today and government says pure water is banned, that shop is dead, right? So the government needs to first of all recognize that this education, if we don't do something about it, nothing is going to happen. Till we see that, we will never. I'm trying to words, right? And before we move off this, look at budget. Budget found out that what? I think it's like about 300 or 400 projects were duplicated. Why? To siphon money out of the country. I don't care if you siphon. I do care, but I don't care. Can we just please do what needs to be done? And which is why I'm saying it's not even about the money that is allocated to the sector. What will they take and do? Sorry, I spoke pidgin English.
I think I get you. Yeah, definitely. But just to shift a little bit, still talking about education, but away from just, the strict sense of it, people always say that, education is not, like you said, it's not just about going to class and coming out. It's a holistic thing. And boarding schools, of course, are a big deal about of that. Of course, we can't go without talking about, Darwin College and the tragedy that happened there and how, the responsibility of schools now, especially private schools, which you talked passionately about the last time you were here, and how there's almost like a free,
there's
nobody. The regulation is pretty loose.
It is. It is.
How do we start to check that where schools understand that this is not just about this? When people are in your care, yes, they need a good education, but they are also building a human being outside of that.
The way private school systems are structured right now is such that there honestly isn't a lot of supervision, not as much as it should be. And that again feeds back into the framework of education in general. Who is checking us, right? Are they properly staffed? Do they again have the proper allocations for what they should be doing in their offices? Or do they know what they really should be doing? If they do that, then there is, because to be honest, in the colleges of education, there's public segment and there's private segment. It's like the two very clear paths for their staff, really. But those in the private, they're not doing what they could be doing, right? Because if somebody sets up a school, you may not know that they've set it up, but there's a level that school will get up to that you would know that, oh, this school is on my radar. And then you go check. What is the framework for check, right? Who does those checks that nobody knows that they're coming? And we don't like it, that's the truth, because you want to be aware that somebody's coming to take a look at you. But there are things called randomized checks, and that should be in place. It's not there. To speak directly to the situation that happened, it was, horribly unfortunate. I really don't like to talk about it, but it did happen. Where did we go from there?
What have we learned?
What have we learned? I would say not much, to be honest, because these things have been happening for a really long time, and not a lot has been done for it. It's publicized now because of the era that we live in. But somebody needs to actually be checking. Somebody needs to say, oh, you have a boarding school. What is the framework of supervision in those boarding schools? What are the reports people should be submitting concerning those boarding schools? You may not have a CCTV in the room, but again, that's why it's a framework, right? What's happening in the hallways? How is it being checked, right? So a lot of those things, the hallways of education in the public and in the private sector are not being checked and monitored like they should until somebody wakes up and says, you know what, we need to appropriate the proper funding to this and we begin to do something about it. My prayer is that we don't have a tragedy, but even worse are the tragedies that nobody's hearing about because they are happening.
Thank you very much for being here today. Always a pleasure to have you. I mean, I want to keep my fingers crossed. Everybody thinks 2022 is going to be the year where nobody pays attention to anything else besides 2020, besides the politics. But we're hoping education doesn't suffer as well.
Yeah, same here.
We're going to take a break now and be right back. Please don't go away.